There have to be a lot of protesters.
Come on. What are we doing? They've been summoned. This Range Rover's a bit too close.
Yeah, that's a bit of the odd one, isn't it?
It's exciting, isn't it?
What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen?
Maybe, yes, maybe this game. And maybe he's going that one instead of this one. That was.
I like it when it gets confusing like this.
Has government given deprived communities enough help to tackle the coronavirus, sir? terms of what's happening here, I mean, there's
well, as I said earlier, my honourable friend, the Chair of the Secretary, he's absolutely right. The Northern Ireland Executive is, this is something that is devolved. It is for them to pay for through the block grant. Those discussions will go ahead in the normal way. But it is also something that, as I say, there is, with the money that is already there, this is something that the Executive can be moving on with, start getting this process going, start getting these payments out to the people who have already waited too long.
James Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can also thank the Secretary of State for all he's done for the Victim Pensions Fund, but I can also ask the Secretary of State to outline what steps have been taken to claw back the money from Sinn Féin that was spent on the court case that took place solely due to Sinn Féin's refusal to do the right thing and to appoint a minister to oversee the Victim Pensions Fund. Sinn Féin should pay the fees, the legal fees.
Well, the court was clear that the Executive, through the actions of not designated department, which was down to just the Deputy First Minister refusing to designate, was acting illegally. He puts forward an interesting proposal that I'm sure that the Finance Minister, in terms of wanting to make sure that Northern Ireland's finances are well spent, will consider properly.
Alistair Carmichael.
Number 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 18 and 19 together. At the end of this year, the process of transition to our new relationship with the EU will be completed. I and colleagues across the Cabinet are determined to ensure that Northern Ireland benefits fully from the opportunities that will bring.
I'm sure that all in business will welcome the announcement from the Secretary of State that there will be guidance given to all those trading in Northern Ireland by the 1st of November. But can he explain to the House how you formulate guidance for the implementation of a deal that has not yet been done? Or will that guidance be written on the presumption that there will be no deal?
As we have done with the guidance that we outlined just before the, just at the time the House broke for the summer recess, we've done that in conjunction with our partners in businesses across Northern Ireland through the business engagement forum that we've put together. So we are consulting with businesses about what they need to live on the protocol, and that protocol does give confidence to businesses about what will be in place next year.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend recognise that the UK internal market is the cornerstone of simplicity in terms of and certainty in terms of attracting investment to all parts of the United Kingdom, and any detractors from the government's plan and policy to maintain the integrity of the UK internal market will be undermining the potential investments in their community?
Absolutely right. My honourable friend makes a hugely important point. The UK internal market bill is something that will outline that integral structure of the United Kingdom as one customs union, one single market that gives confidence to businesses and to investors for the benefit of all of our economies.
Dr. Andrew Morrison.
Both I and ministerial colleagues speak regularly with counterparts in the Irish government. The protocol itself provides for a practical solution that avoids a hard border on the island of Ireland in all circumstances, including in the event that we do not agree a free trade agreement, whilst ensuring that the UK, including Northern Ireland, can leave the EU as a whole.
Andrew Morrison.
Very grateful to the Secretary of State. He will know that small and medium-sized enterprises having business across that border are in a state of uncertainty at the moment, given what is potentially going to hit them in 4 months' time. Given that, the Trader Support Service that was announced last month is particularly welcome. What discussion has he had with trade organisations in Northern Ireland about the Trader Support Service, and when does he anticipate the service actually providing services to SMEs?
Secretary of State.
I thank my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. We have had continuing engagement with businesses, as well as not just myself, but ministerial colleagues, the Business Secretary and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster have both been in Northern Ireland engaging with businesses and representative organisations, as is my colleague, the Minister of State, and we will continue to do that, and we aim to have this scheme running in September.
John Morrissey.
Question 21, Mr. Speaker.
Thank
Minister
you,
Walker.
Mr. Speaker. Self-isolation exemptions have been in place since the 5th of July for the whole of the United Kingdom for all international cast and crew working on qualifying TV and film productions. We've worked closely with the Northern Ireland Executive and the film and TV industry, which has been a major success in Northern Ireland and represents a significant part of its economy, estimated to be worth £270 million a year. This has seen important projects such as the Northman and Line of Duty restart filming, bringing significant investment to Northern Ireland's economy.
John Morrissey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that the quarantine exemption arrangements
could be the catalyst for reigniting the Northern Ireland film industry, where 49 locations were used for Game of Thrones, including Winterfell. And although the days of House Stark have passed, I hope that this exemption will allow for Northern Ireland to continue to be a beacon for the film industry across the world.
Walker.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and as I said, over the summer we introduced those exemptions, and we absolutely recognise what a crucial and important sector this is, and the benefits of its success can be seen across Northern Ireland, not least for the tourism industry. And local success stories such as Game of Thrones and the Derry Girls benefit every part of Northern Ireland. Programmes like The Fall have firmly established Northern Ireland as an ideal destination for film and TV projects, and the restart of filming in significant projects shows that this industry can continue to achieve global success.
Stephanie Peacock.
Question number 22, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 22 and 23 together. The Government recognises that this industry is key to Northern Ireland's economic success, with the sector in Northern Ireland valued at over £1.8 billion. Like many sectors, aerospace has come under immense pressure during the pandemic. This is why we put unprecedented levels of support into place through the Job Retention Scheme and the Bank of England's COVID Corporate Finance Facility. Last week, I met with Bombardier at their short site and stratospheric platforms to discuss the challenges and opportunities for developing that sector and how the UK Government can support their success.
Stephanie Peacock.
Ministers seem to be doing little more than shrugging their shoulders as the UK's world-leading aerospace sector goes to the wall. When will they step in with sector-specific support?
Minister.
Well, I'd say to the Honourable Lady that the UK Government has made available £2.1 billion to the UK aerospace sector through the COVID Corporate Financing Facility and additional flexibility for UK export finance, which is supporting £3.5 billion of sales in the next 18 months. But I continue to work closely with my colleague, the Aerospace Minister, my Honourable friend for Stratford-on-Avon, and I'm determined that we do support the businesses in Northern Ireland as across the UK.
Gavin Robbins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do trust that the Minister's visit was successful to Bombardier last week. He knows how important aerospace is to the Northern Ireland economy, but he also knows that there's a cliff edge coming in the job retention scheme and the support that's there for our aerospace sector particularly. He also knows that should redundancies continue, should the situation get worse, the skills will be lost and they won't come back. So the time is coming. The talk is talk. We need to see action, and we need to see a bespoke package of support for aerospace in Northern Ireland and across the United Kingdom.
Minister.
Well, I absolutely sympathise with the point the honourable gentleman is making and the crucial importance of this sector and its skills to his constituency. And the COVID-19 outbreak has seen a severe impact on aviation and aerospace industries around the world. The UK Government has provided significant support to the sector, including the Business Interruption Scheme and the Job Retention Scheme. The Chancellor has confirmed that commitment remains in place until October. But one of the things I discussed with Bombardier in my visit last week is the vital importance of maintaining that skills base, and that is a point I will absolutely take to colleagues across government.
Cheryl Murray.
Question 24, please, Mr Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The threat from dissident Republican terrorism does continue to be severe in Northern Ireland. The Government's first priority is to keep people safe and secure across the UK. Terrorism, paramilitary violence and criminality have no place in Northern Ireland. They must not hold us back from progress towards a peaceful and prosperous future. And as I said earlier on, thanks to the hard work and professionalism of the Police Service of Northern Ireland and their partners, 10 people have recently been arrested and charged with a range of terrorism offences under the Terrorism Act. These arrests are the biggest step in tackling violent dissident Republicans in Northern Ireland in a generation, and I thank the PSNI for their work.
Cheryl Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What action has the Government taken to protect those who provided security in Northern Ireland, both in the police and military, from vexatious historic accusations?
Thank my honourable friend for her question, and we as a government are clear. We will put an end to vexatious claims against our brilliant armed forces. We are also determined to address the legacy of the Troubles, as I set out in my written ministerial statement on the 18th of March, and we will deliver on that.
That's the end of Northern Ireland questions, so we're now coming towards Prime Ministers as we await. Can I wish the Leader of the Opposition happy birthday as well? So we now come to question 1 from Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Question number 1.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much. 3 weeks ago today, community in my constituency of West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, and indeed I think the entire country was rocked by the events on the railway line just south of Stonehaven, the tragic events in which 3 men, Brett McCulloch, Chris Stutchbury and Donald Dinny, tragically lost their lives. I'm sure my right honourable friend, indeed the whole House, will join me in sending our deepest condolences to the family and friends of those 3 men today, as well as our thanks and heartfelt gratitude to the incredible men and women of our emergency services and multiple agencies who worked in incredibly difficult conditions to help the survivors from that incident. The interim report is on the desk of the Transport Secretary as we speak, and I know that the full report will take time to run its course, as is only right. But what assurances can my right honourable friend give my constituents that the serious questions that they have will be answered, any recommendations will be implemented, and that the government will do everything it can to prevent an accident like this from ever happening again?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I know the whole House will want to join with me in sending our condolences to the family and friends of Brett McCulloch, Donald Dinny and Christopher Stutchbury. And I would like to join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the extraordinary work of the emergency services and the public for the bravery that they showed. Britain's railways are among the safest in Europe, partly because we take accidents like this so seriously, and therefore we must ensure that we learn the lessons of this tragic event to make sure that no such incident recurs in the future.
Now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you. Can I join with the Prime Minister on those comments about the tragic events of just a few weeks ago? Mr. Speaker, can I also begin by paying tribute to John Hume, who passed away during recess. John was a beacon of light in the most troubled of times. He'll be seriously missed. Mr. Speaker, let me start today with the exams fiasco. On the day that thousands of young people had their A-level grades downgraded, the Prime Minister said, and I quote him, "The exam results are robust. They're good, they're dependable." The Education Secretary said there would absolutely not be a U-turn. A few days later, a U-turn. We learned yesterday that the Education Secretary knew well in advance that there was a problem with the algorithm. So a straight answer to a straight question, please, Prime Minister. When did the Prime Minister first know that there was a problem with the algorithm?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps I could begin by congratulating the right honourable gentleman on his birthday and say to him that on the exams and the stress that young people have been through over the summer, both the Secretary of State for Education and I understand very well how difficult it has been for them and for their families going through a pandemic at a time when we have not been able, because of that pandemic, in common with most other countries in the world, to stage normal examinations. And as a result of what we learned about the tests, the results that had come in, we did institute a change. We did act. The students, the pupils of this country, now do have their grades. And I really ask the right honourable gentleman whether he will join me in congratulating those pupils on their hard work and whether he agrees with me that they deserve the grades they've got.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I've already expressed congratulations to all those students, and I do so again. But I want to go back to my question, which the Prime Minister avoided. And I know why he avoided it. Because he either knew of the problem with the algorithm and did nothing, or he didn't know when he should have. So let me ask again, when did the Prime Minister first know there'd be a problem with the algorithm?
Mr. Speaker, as you know perfectly well, Ofqual made it absolutely clear time and again that in their view the system that was in place was robust. Ofqual is, as he knows, an independent organisation, and credit had to be given to their views. All summer long, Mr. Speaker, he's been going around undermining confidence, spreading doubts, and in particular about the return to school in safe conditions, and it's absolutely true. And today is a great day because the parents, the pupils of this country, the teachers of this country are overwhelmingly proving him wrong and proving the doubters wrong, Mr. Speaker, because they are going back to school in record numbers in spite of all the gloom and dubitation that he tried to spread. And I think it would be a fine thing, Mr. Speaker, if today, after 3 months of refusing to do so as pupils go back to school if today, finally, he said that school was safe to go back to? Come on.
Keir Starmer.
The Prime Minister is just tin-eared and making it up as he goes along. I'm surprised. The Education Secretary stood at that dispatch box yesterday and said and acknowledged that Labour's first priority has been getting children back to school. That's been our first priority. I've said it numerous times in this dispatch box. He knows it very well. He's just playing games. Mr. Speaker, and he's fooling nobody. Even his own MPs have run out of patience. The Vice Chair of the 22 Committee, the MP for Broxbourne, has said the government says one thing on Monday, changes its mind on Tuesday, something different is presented on Wednesday. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Another of his MPs, who wisely wants to remain anonymous, perhaps in the chamber today, he or she said, I am speaking for you because this is what was said, it's mess after mess. His own MPs, U-turn after U-turn. It's a fundamental issue of competence. God knows what's going on. There's no grip. His own MPs are right, aren't they?
Mr. Speaker, this is a leader of the opposition who backed remaining in the EU and now is totally silent on the side. Now has performed a U-turn. He backed, and perhaps he still does, Mr. Speaker. This is a leader of the opposition who supported an IRA condoning politician who wanted to get out of NATO and now says absolutely nothing. This is a leader of the opposition who sat on the front bench whilst there was anti-Semitism.
I think there are questions being asked. We do need to try and answer the questions that's being put to the Prime Minister. It will be helpful to those who are watching to know the answers. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think it will be helpful to all those who are watching to know.
Minister, I think I'll make the decisions today. Come on, Prime Minister.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, if I may say, I think it will be helpful to all those who are watching to know that this opposition and this leader of the opposition said absolutely nothing to oppose the method of examinations that was proposed, and indeed they opposed the teacher accreditation system that we eventually came up with. Is he now saying that those grades aren't right, or is it just Captain Hindsight leaping on a bandwagon and opposing a policy that he supported 2 weeks ago?
Yes, Starmer.
The problem is he's governing in hindsight. That's why he's making so many mistakes. Mr. Speaker, before I go on, the Prime Minister said something about the IRA, and I want him to take it back. I worked in Northern Ireland for 5 years with the police services of Northern Ireland, bringing peace. I prosecuted the Director of Public Prosecution, serious terrorists, for 5 years, working with the intelligence and security forces and with the police in Northern Ireland. Asked the Prime Minister to have the decency to withdraw that comment. Mr. Prime Minister, it's the same every time. Pretend the problem doesn't exist, brush away scrutiny, make the wrong decision, then blame somebody else. This has got to change, because the next major decision for the Prime Minister is on the furlough scheme. The jobs of millions of people are at risk. The longer he delays, the more they're at risk. So will he act now, finally get this decision right, and commit to extend the furlough for those sectors and those workers that desperately need it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing in this government is getting people back to school, getting our pupils back to school in spite of all the doubts that he's tried to sow, and we are getting people back to work. What he wants to do is extend the furlough scheme, on which this country has already spent £40 billion. What we would rather do is get people into work through our Kickstart scheme, which we are launching today, £2 billion to spend to support people, young people in particular, to get the jobs that they need. He wants to keep people out of work in suspended animation. We want to move this country forward. That's the difference between him and us.
Can I just say there was a question about the allegation and all that? I was very concerned that was the point I was making. I think, in fairness, I'm sure you would like to withdraw.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to say that I think that I listened to the protestations of the Right Honourable Gentleman. I think they would have been more in order throughout the long years in which he supported a leader of the Labour Party.
Leave it as it was. Yes.
When the Prime Minister has worked with the security and intelligence forces prosecuting criminals and terrorists, he can lecture me. I asked him to do the decent thing, but doing the decent thing and this Prime Minister don't go together. This has been a wasted summer. The government should have spent it preparing for the autumn and winter. Instead, they've lurched from crisis to crisis, U-turn to U-turn. To correct one error, even two might make sense. But when the government's notched up 12 U-turns and rising, the only conclusion is serial incompetence. That serial incompetence is holding Britain back. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility and finally get a grip?
Mr. Speaker, I take full responsibility for everything that has happened under this government throughout my period in office. And actually what has happened so far is that we have succeeded in turning the tide of this pandemic. And in spite of the negativity and the constant sniping from the opposition, we are seeing a country that is not only going back to school, but going back to work. Britain is in the lead in developing vaccines. We are in the lead in finding cures for this disease, in dexamethasone, in finding treatments for this disease. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, we are taking this country forward in spite of the extreme difficulties that we face. What I think the people of this country would appreciate is he and I, the Labour front bench, everybody across this House, coming together and uniting and saying that it is safe for kids to get back to school. And I must say, Mr. Speaker, we still have not heard that, those words from the Right Honourable Gentleman. Will he now say school is safe?
I've said it so many times. School is safe. My own children have been in school throughout. There's no issue on this. The Prime Minister seeking to divide instead of... I wrote to him on the 18th of May in confidence and in private, offering my support to him to get kids back to school. The only reason they weren't back before the summer was because of his incompetent Education Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will recall that before the recess, I asked him if he would meet the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group. I had the privilege of meeting the families on the 15th of July. They gave me incredibly moving accounts of how COVID-19 had taken their loved ones from them. On Sky News last week, the Prime Minister was asked if he would meet the families. And he said, and I'll quote, "Of course I will meet the bereaved. Of course I will do that." But yesterday, they received a letter from the Prime Minister saying that meeting them was now, regrettably, not possible. The Prime Minister will understand the frustration and the hurt of those families that he said one thing to camera and another to them. Can I urge the Prime Minister to reconsider, to do the right thing and find time to meet these grieving families?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if I may say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, it's absolutely typical of him that he should frame it in that way, because when I made that answer, of course I was very happy to meet the families of the bereaved, and I sympathise deeply with all those who have lost loved ones throughout this pandemic, and we all feel their pain and their grief. But it turns out that this particular group that he refers to are currently in litigation against the government, and I will certainly meet them once that litigation is concluded. But I may say to him, it would be a better thing, rather than trying to score points in that way, if he joined together with us and with this government and said not only is school safe, but it is also safe to go back to. And by the way, Mr. Speaker, that's the first time in 4 months he said it. As I'm delighted to have extracted it from him over this dispatch box. He's never said it to me in the House of Commons. I hope, Mr. Speaker, he will also say that it is safe for the workforce of this country to go back to work in a COVID-secure way. We want to take this country forward. We're not only getting the pandemic under control, with deaths down, with hospital admissions way, way down. We will continue to tackle it with local lockdowns, with our superlative test and trace system, which, by the way, before they sneer, before they mock at it, Mr. Speaker, has now conducted more tests than any other country in Europe. And he might hail that rather than sneering at this country's achievements.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Discussions in the joint committee established under the withdrawal agreement will have the most crucial bearing on the future of trade, not only between the UK and the EU, but also within the UK itself. Unless otherwise agreed in that committee, goods passing from Great Britain to Northern Ireland will be subject to the full rigour of the European Customs Code and also to the imposition of tariffs. That would be quite unacceptable, so will my right honourable friend commit to do whatever it takes to ensure that it does not happen?
Prime Minister.
Yes, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the concern that he does, and we must, of course, and will deliver on what the protocol says, which is that there shall be unfettered access between GB, NI and NI GB, and there should be no tariffs, and we will legislate in the course of the next months to guarantee that.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford, on the first of 2 questions.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition on the tragedy that we witnessed close to Stonehaven, and indeed to the tribute that we had to John Hume from the Leader of the Opposition. John Hume, a man that did so much for the delivery of peace in the island of Ireland. Mr Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister told his Cabinet, and I quote, "I am no great nautical expert, but sometimes it is necessary to tack here in response to the facts as they change." It was surprisingly honest for the Prime Minister to admit his government is all at sea. A UK government now defined by 8 U-turns in 8 months. But if the Prime Minister is true to his word, then surely he must see sense and change tack for a 9th time. With the clock ticking for struggling businesses and workers, will the Prime Minister commit today to extend the job retention scheme beyond October? Or is his government making the political choice to accept levels of unemployment last seen under Thatcher in the early 1980s?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I members of opposite of all parties seem to want to extend the furlough scheme, which has already cost this country £40 billion, helped supported 11 million people, but after all keeps them in suspended animation and prevents them from going to work. What we want to do is get people back to work. And that's why I hope he will instead support our Kickstarter scheme to get young people into jobs and support them in those jobs. How much better is that than languishing out of work?
Ian Blackford.
My goodness, Mr Speaker, languishing out of work. The furlough scheme is there to protect people so they can come back to work when the time is right. Mr Speaker, France, Germany and Ireland have extended their furlough scheme into 2021. Mr Speaker, they have made a moral choice. They are not prepared to punish their people with record levels of unemployment. You know, Mr Speaker, people in Scotland are seeing a tale of 2 governments. While the Tories are cutting furlough scheme support, yesterday Nicola Sturgeon was announcing new investment to protect jobs, including a youth guarantee. We all know that jobs are under threat if the furlough scheme ends in October. The power to end this threat lies with the Prime Minister. Will he do his duty and extend the furlough scheme, or are we going to return to levels of unemployment last seen under Thatcher with the resultant human misery?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what we are doing is not only continuing with the furlough scheme, as he knows, until the end of this month, which is by far more generous, by the way, than anything provided in France or Germany or Ireland. We're continuing with it, but we will also, after that scheme elapses, we will get on with other measures to support people in work. And starting today, there is the Kickstarter scheme to help young people get the jobs that they need. That is in addition to a £160 billion package that we have spent to support the economy throughout this crisis. This government has put its arms around all the people of this country to support them throughout the crisis. That is what we are doing, and we will now help them to get back into work.
Big Green.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I share my right honourable friend's enthusiasm that those who can get back to work safely in their offices should do so. But realistically, many will only want to do so for 2 or 3 days a week. Can I urge him to use his considerable powers of persuasion to encourage the rail industry to introduce immediately flexible season tickets so that those people are not tied into traditional work patterns, both to help many thousands of commuters in areas like mine in Ashford, but also to help save the rail industry?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend, and he's absolutely right that we are working at pace with rail companies to try to deliver new products in terms of ticketing, which ensure not just better value, but also enable people to get back to work in a flexible way.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Can I thank the Prime Minister and the Chancellor for the financial and economic interventions their government have made to date. But he will be aware, as much as we want to see people back in work, that there are certain sectors, such as tourism, travel, hospitality and aerospace, where that will not be possible in the short to medium term. Therefore, can I encourage the Prime Minister to look at a targeted extension for those sectors, and also to look at a specific UK-wide scheme to help those so far who have been excluded from the current schemes, including the newly self-employed.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the right honourable gentleman knows, there are a great number of schemes in addition to the job retention scheme that support people in work and in all sorts of sectors of the coronavirus. Loans, the bounce-back loans, the grants that we've made to businesses of all kinds. He mentions the tourism and hospitality sector. We've made huge investments in those. There's a very successful Eat Out to Help Out scheme that we've been running. But it is also very important that we get people back into the workplace in a COVID-secure way. And unlike the Leader of Opposition, we do absolutely everything we can to give them confidence that it is a good idea to go back. And an ounce of confidence, Mr. Speaker, is worth a ton of taxpayers' money.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The Bounce Back Loan Scheme has been a huge success, delivered by the Prime Minister and indeed the Chancellor. 1.3 million loans being granted, vital support for SMEs. But the All-Party Group on Fair Business Banking, which I co-chair, has established that there are 250,000 businesses who currently bank with fintechs and alternative lenders who do not have access to those loans because they cannot get access to the Bank of England's term funding scheme, and lenders who do have those loans are not really accepting loan applications from new customers. Would the Prime Minister use his best offices to persuade the Governor of the Bank of England to open up the term funding scheme to those alternative finance organisations, or open the doors of other lenders who can provide those schemes, those loans, to other SMEs?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend. He raises an important point. Those, as he will know, the rules around access to schemes for alternative finance are not the responsibility of my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, but for the Bank of England. But I'm sure the Governor will have heard him today.
We now come to Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the summer months, many people undertake a range of activities. For some, it's camping. For others, it's festivals and events. In my Midlothian constituency, we've got a number of highly successful employers in audiovisual technology, hospitality and creative industries, none of whom can currently undertake their normal activities. In the face of this, when furlough ends, these companies could face collapse. What should I tell them? That the government are today going to extend the scheme to make sure the industry can get back on its feet, or has the government completely given up on them?
Hear, hear. Prime Minister.
Not at all, Mr. Speaker. We've supported the arts industry alone with, I think, about £1.7 billion of support, and in Scotland, as I'm sure he never tires of saying, the overall support for tackling coronavirus has been of the order of about £4 billion, and we will continue to give support. But we happen to think, and I hope it's common ground across the House, we happen to think that it would be better for the UK economy, better for all the people that he rightly cares about, to get back into work, Mr. Speaker.
James Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, one positive among the gloom of the COVID pandemic is that this year's I'm a Celebrity will be filmed not in New South Wales, Australia, but in our own North Wales. Even if I cannot tempt the Prime Minister to take part in a Welsh Tucker trial, would he commend ITV on its choice of venue and welcome the positive impact this can have on the regional economy?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's right to draw attention to the wonderful attractions of North Wales, which I know very well myself. When I tried to get elected there many years ago, unsuccessfully. And I congratulate him on his success, and may it be long repeated.
Heading up to Adrian Shotts with Neil Gray. Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this summer, the Treasury floated a story in the Telegraph suggesting a public sector pay freeze to save money. Given so many public sector workers, such as nurses, police, firefighters, teachers and others, have put their lives on the line to fight COVID, surely this would be an unconscionable betrayal. Will the Prime Minister therefore unequivocally not only rule out a pay freeze, but commit to fully funding a package to ensure they are remunerated to reflect their sacrifices?
I must say, I listened carefully to what the Honourable Gentleman said. He seems to have ignored the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we just had an inflation-busting public sector pay rise, and that nurses alone, as part of the package that we agreed in 2018, have had a 12.5% pay increase since then. I appreciate his sentiments. He's on the right lines, but he should look at what's actually happening.
Angela Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alexander Dennis has been manufacturing buses in Guildford for over 100 years with exciting new low and zero emission vehicles. I'm sure my right honourable friend will be as saddened as I was to hear that 200 jobs have been made redundant locally. Does he agree with me that the fantastic skills these workers have are vital as part of our green recovery? And will he work with me and colleagues to ensure the long-term success of UK bus manufacturing for both domestic and export markets?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her very apposite intervention on behalf of Alexander Dennis. I'm a keen customer, was a keen customer of Alexander Dennis's fantastic machines, and I hope that our green recovery and our massive investment in green buses, and I can't guarantee this, but I hope it will be of benefit to the workforce of Alexander Dennis.
Heading to Swansea West with Geraint Davies. Geraint Davies.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is stumbling forward into mass unemployment with the sudden and universal removal of furlough and towards a further spike and resurgence in coronavirus due to making people who are working from home travel to work. In order to minimise further and future bad decisions and U-turns, will he fully restore the online Parliament so that all voters can be fully represented in all debates and all lawmaking, as happens in the Welsh Government and the Scottish Government and the Lords, whether their MPs are shielded or unshielded, so that we make the best decisions with the least harm during the pandemic and during the recession by the reintroduction of proper online democracy?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Gentleman. I encourage him to return from New York or Shanghai or wherever he is, and to join us as fast as we can here in this House. And I think actually what the people of this country want to see is their representatives back on their seats as fast as possible in the Palace of Westminster. And that is what we should work for. That's why we're working together to drive down this virus and create a COVID-secure environment.
Andrew Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I buy a copy of the Mirror, the Mail or the Telegraph, I'm not required to buy a copy of the Guardian. And yet when I want to watch live TV on Sky, Amazon Prime or ITV, I am forced to pay for the BBC. Does the Prime Minister believe that this is a sustainable situation in the medium or longer term?
My honourable friend makes a very interesting point, a point of view I'm sure shared by many people in this country. But my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, will be setting out a roadmap shortly for reform of the BBC and addressing the very issue that he mentions.
Just going down to Brentford and Isleworth with Ruth Cabray. Ruth Cabray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Financial Times published a list of the 12 government U-turns made under this Prime Minister, from the exam results fiasco to the contact tracing app to the wearing of masks. He's just said that he takes full responsibility. So I wonder which of those 12 U-turns is the Prime Minister's favourite?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, you know, it's a rare privilege to ask a question in the House of Commons. You would have thought they could come up with something better than that. I have to. All I want to say to her is that this is a global pandemic that this government is dealing with extremely effectively at a medical level, and what we want to do now is, in a COVID-secure way, not only get our children back into school, because that's what's happening today, in spite of the, I don't know where she's been on this question, but in spite of the Leader of the Opposition and his colleagues. And what we also want to do is get our country economy back on its feet again and get us back to work. So I hope that she and her colleagues will say that it is also safe to go back to work in a COVID-secure way.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will be well aware that, welcome though it is, the start of the new term this week will be challenging for all schools. It will be particularly so for Burton Green Church of England Academy in my constituency, where HS2 has just closed the road that many parents use to access the school. It's done that for several months with little notice or consultation, and contrary to assurances given during the passage of the HS2 bill. This is not, as my right honourable friend well knows, the first or only example of high-handedness or poor communication on the part of HS2. So will he please help me to require of HS2 that it does better for the people of Burton Green and elsewhere on the route?
Yes. Prime Minister.
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker. Well, I heartily endorse, I'm afraid, the sentiments that he's expressed. Anybody who's worked with HS2 over the last few years will know that they do treat local residents with, I'm afraid, a high-handed approach, or have done. And what I can tell him, however, is that where there is damage to local roads, HS2 will pay compensation. I will certainly take his point up with HS2.
Tosborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Low public confidence and social distancing measures means many businesses are struggling. If the job retention scheme ends in October, there will be catastrophic consequences for workers, businesses and the economy. So despite earlier waffle from the Prime Minister, I'm asking him again, will he commit to extending the job retention scheme, or are we to expect more government incompetence resulting in unnecessary redundancies and further strains on our already collapsing economy?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I direct the Honourable Lady to what I've said already, which is that there will always be those who argue for an infinite extension of the furlough scheme and who want to keep people off work, unemployed, being paid very substantial sums for a very long time. I don't think that's the right thing. I think the best way forward for our country is to get people, as far as we possibly can, back into work. And there's the job retention bonus, as she knows, at the end of the year, and there are abundant schemes. Already £160 billion has been spent to support the economy throughout the crisis, and we will continue, as I said, to put our arms around the entire people to keep them going throughout this crisis. But furlough, indefinite furlough, is just not the answer.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our nation has a proud history as a safe haven for desperate souls. But now the asylum system is broken and being abused. So the people of Ashfield would like to know, when will the Prime Minister introduce legislation to fix the asylum system, which will save lives by taking back control of our borders?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I have a great deal of sympathy with those who are so desperate as to put their children in dinghies or even children's paddling pools and try to cross the channel. But I have to say that what they are doing is falling prey to criminal gangs, and they are breaking the law. They're also undermining the legitimate claims of others who would seek asylum in this country. And that is why we will take advantage of leaving the EU by changing the Dublin regulations on returns, and we will address the rigidities in our laws that make this country, I'm afraid, a target and a magnet for those who would exploit vulnerable people in this way.
Gavin Robinson.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, and I trust that the Prime Minister had an enjoyable visit to Harland and Wolff's new yard in Appledore. He knows well the mother yard of Harland and Wolff in my constituency of East Belfast, and I just ask that the Prime Minister not only recognises the important strategic purchase of Appledore, but recognise that Harland and Wolff are now in an incredibly well-placed position to assist this country in our future defence needs.
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and yes, it was incredibly exciting to go to Appledore and see the potential of that yard, and to see what Harland and Wolff is doing there. And also, of course, he's absolutely right in what he says about the potential for various other contracts, both in Devon and in Belfast. But I can't give him now the kind of guarantees that he wants over this dispatch box. But watch this space.
Mr Blackford, you have given me notice of this point of order. I think it is important just to clear up this matter. It isn't normally that I would allow urgent questions to be interfered with or statements, so therefore on this occasion I'm going to allow it. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm most grateful. On Friday the 21st of August, the Daily Mail ran a front-page story revealing the location of the Prime Minister's holiday in Scotland. This was a violation of his family's privacy that neither myself nor my party in any way condone. Later the same day, a senior Conservative source in Downing Street told the Sun newspaper, and I quote, "The finger of blame for all this getting out is being pointed at the SNP, particularly Ian Blackford, who is local." This was subsequently repeated in a number of newspapers and broadcast outlets. This allegation and briefing was entirely and deliberately false. It was a targeted political smear from the Prime Minister's office. The photographer who provided the material for the original Daily Mail front page later confirmed that I was not the source in revealing the Prime Minister's location. A location, I might add, I was not even aware of. However, by this point, the damage was done. This matter has not only been the worst kind of political smear, the false allegation has equally resulted in security implications for myself and my family, given its serious and personal nature. You know, I can see the Prime Minister pulling a face, but all you have to do is to go to social media and see the threats that I was then forced to witness. It is a very serious situation when the apparatus of the UK government can be deployed in this way, manufacturing false briefings in order to attack an opposition politician. I raised this issue with the Prime Minister's office in writing. However, as I have not received a response, I am raising this point of order today to ensure these false briefings are now stopped and are never repeated for any parliamentarian.
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, may I first of all say what a wonderful staycation holiday I had in the Right Honourable Gentleman's constituency. What a fantastic part of the world it is, and how thoroughly I commend it to everybody. It's absolutely beautiful location. He's very lucky to represent it. On the substantive point that he raises, I'm very happy to accept the assurances that he gives. However, I just draw his attention to he talks about going to social media. I draw his attention to a tweet by a chap called Torquil Crichton on 17th of August, saying, "Ferocious midge count in Wester Ross tonight, I hear, must be bad if you're fair-skinned and camping," and to which an account that purports to be the Right Honourable Gentleman, but I'm sure it isn't because of what he has just said, says, "I wonder if an education at Eton stands you in good stead for these blighters." Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that he had I'm happy to accept his assurances and his protestations, and I think we should leave it at that, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah. What I would like to say, obviously, Mr. Brennan, thank you. Can I just say what I'm very concerned about is the security implication to the Prime Minister and the security implication to the leader of the SNP. Please, can I just say to everyone, let's be very, very careful and let's learn from this. And obviously, it is on the record from both parties, and I hope we can draw a line under it. But please, let's take each other's security very, very serious. Thank you. In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I am now suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Thank you. We now come to the urgent question. I call Nick Thomas-Symonds to ask his urgent question. Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on those crossing the English Channel in small boats.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. In recent months, the UK has seen a completely unacceptable increase in illegal migration through small boat crossings from France to the UK. This government and the Home Secretary are working relentlessly to stop these crossings. Illegal migration is not a new phenomenon. Every government over the last 20 years and more has experienced migrants, often economic migrants, attempting to reach the UK through illegal means. The majority of these crossings are facilitated by ruthless criminal gangs who make money from exploiting migrants who are desperate to come here. We are working with the National Crime Agency to go after those who profit from such misery. Already this year, 24 people have been convicted and jailed for facilitating illegal immigration. In July, I joined a dawn raid on addresses across London which saw a further 11 people arrested for facilitating illegal immigration, and £150,000 in cash and some luxury cars were seized. And just this morning, we arrested a man under Section 25 of the 1971 Immigration Act who had yesterday illegally piloted a boat into this country. Further such arrests are expected. Mr Speaker, these crossings are highly dangerous. Tragically, last month, a 28-year-old Sudanese man, Abdel Fattah Hamdallah, died in the water near Calais attempting this crossing. And this morning, the RNLI has been out in the English Channel and has had to rescue at least 34 people and possibly more who were attempting this dangerous journey. But these criminally facilitated journeys are not just dangerous, they are unnecessary as well. France, where these boats are launched, and other EU countries through which these migrants have travelled on their way to the Channel are manifestly safe countries with fully functioning asylum systems. Genuine refugees seeking only safety can and should claim asylum in the first safe country they reach. There is no excuse to refuse to do so and instead travel illegally and dangerously to the UK. Those fleeing persecution have had many opportunities to claim asylum in the European countries they have passed through long before attempting this crossing. Mr Speaker, we are working closely with our French colleagues to prevent these crossings. This includes patrols of the beaches by French officers, some of whom we fund, surveillance and intelligence sharing. Over 3,000 crossing attempts were stopped this year alone by the French authorities, and approaching 50% of all crossing attempts are stopped on or near French beaches. This morning alone, French authorities prevented at least 84 people from attempting this crossing, thanks in significant part to the daily intelligence briefings provided by the National Crime Agency here in the United Kingdom. It serves both French and UK interests to work together to cut this route. If this route is completely ended, migrants wishing to come to the UK will no longer need to travel to northern France in the first place, and we are therefore urgently discussing with the French government how our current plans can be strengthened and made truly comprehensive. We have already, in the last 2 months, established a joint intelligence cell to ensure intelligence about crossings is rapidly acted upon, and this morning's interceptions on French soil are evidence of the success of that approach. It is also essential to return people who make the crossings where we can, and we are currently working to return nearly 1,000 cases where migrants had previously claimed asylum in European countries and, under the regulations, legally should be returned there. Last month, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, announced the appointment of former Royal Marine Dan O'Mahony as clandestine Channel Threat Commander. He will collaborate closely with the French to build on the joint work already underway, urgently exploring tougher action in France, including...
Look, Minister, I don't know. Advisers should know it's 3 minutes. We're now nearly on 5, and I don't understand how the mistake has come.
Well, Mr Speaker, I sincerely apologise. In that case, let me just conclude by saying these crossings are dangerous, illegal and unnecessary. They should simply not be happening, and this government will not rest until we've taken the necessary steps to completely end these crossings.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to you for granting this urgent question and for the response. And I'd firstly like to send my thoughts to the family of Abdul Fattah Hamdallah, who died in the English Channel, a powerful reminder of the gravity of this issue. Over a year ago, the Home Secretary said, "We've been working extremely closely with our French colleagues to tackle the use of small boats, but we both agreed more needs to be done." Why does the Minister think that work last year has proved so inadequate? The Minister himself scrambled to France on the 11th of August and announced a joint action plan. Can he outline when that will be available for scrutiny? We all agree, Mr. Speaker, on the need to tackle criminal gangs. But does the Minister also accept the importance of safe routes for those seeking asylum? The government was warned, including by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that the collapse of safe routes would lead to growing numbers of people taking to the sea. The expectation around the Dubs Amendment across the House was that 3,000 children would be accepted under the scheme. Does the Minister now agree it was a profound error and frankly lacking in compassion to close down that scheme when only a tenth of that number had been accepted? In relation to any children who've been intercepted on this crossing, what provisions have been put in place for their welfare? And what safeguards are being put in place to ensure that all accommodation is kept safe and COVID secure, as well as protected from far-right attacks which have unfortunately been reported in recent days? What we need now, Mr. Speaker, are solutions, not empty headlines trying to sound tough. And I have deep concerns that the government in recent weeks, through talking up deploying the Navy and the RAF, have tried to militarise a solution where lives are at risk. Ultimately, the sad truth is that people are fleeing their homes as a result of poverty, war and persecution. So does the Minister accept that abolishing the Department of International Development is a great mistake? And isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker, that the government's approach to this whole issue has frankly been defined by a lack of compassion and a lack of competence?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will try and be brief in my reply. The Shadow Home Secretary asks about why numbers are so high. I mean, global migration has been growing very strongly. He will be aware that 40,000 people, far larger numbers than cross the Channel, have crossed the Mediterranean. And moreover, during coronavirus, we have seen displacement from other illegal entry routes, such as lorries and with fake documents on aeroplanes, into the maritime route. Moreover, we've been very successful at preventing illegal immigration through the juxtaposed controls, and that's been compounded by unusually benign weather conditions in the English Channel over the summer period. He asks about safe routes. This government has provided almost 20,000 resettlement places since 2015, a number dwarfing the 3,000 he mentioned. Since 2010, 44,000 children have been offered protection by the United Kingdom of one form or another. So when he says our approach lacks compassion, I would point him to those figures. I would also remind him that in last year, 2019, this country received more applications from UASCs, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, than any other European country, all of whom have been generously looked after while their claims are processed. He asked about children. When children arrive, they go straight into social care, and they are extremely carefully looked after while their claims are processed. So, Mr. Speaker, this government certainly needs no lessons in compassion. Our asylum system is extremely compassionate, extremely generous, and those numbers speak for themselves.
Araba.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his statement. Could I impress upon him the strength of feeling on this in Newcastle-under-Lyme and elsewhere? It's not because my constituents lack compassion and humanity, but it's because they recognise that what's going on is not only illegal, but also represents unfair queue jumping. And I spoke to my honourable friend, the member for Dover, about this earlier. I know the work she's been doing all summer to bring this to his attention as well. Does he agree that what's happening at the moment is essentially a form of asylum shopping, where people claim asylum in the first country they reach and then they move to another and claim asylum again? They keep claiming asylum. Instead of securing the first safe country, they keep coming to the UK, where they believe we have a more favourable asylum system. Asylum shopping needs to end. Does he agree with that?
Well, I thank my honourable friend. Let me join him in paying tribute to the member for Dover for her tireless campaigning on this issue. She has done a huge amount of work in this area. And my honourable friend is absolutely right. People who are genuinely seeking a safe refuge could and should claim that refuge in the first country they reach. The people arriving in Dover yesterday and today have left from France. France is a safe country with a well-functioning asylum system. And if their principal objective was to seek refuge from persecution, they could easily have done it in France or indeed any of the other countries through which they passed before arriving in Calais.
We're heading to Stuart C. MacDonald, who's the SNP spokesperson. Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 5 years on from the day the world was shocked by little Alan Kurdi's death, perhaps the Minister could just agree that the response to the Channel crossings should be informed by empathy and evidence and not driven by Farage and fiction. And therefore, despite what he has said, will we confirm that there is nothing in international law that requires refugees to apply in the first safe state that they come to, even though the overwhelming majority do so? Will he acknowledge that there will be good reason, such as family ties, for many of the people attempting crossings to make their claims here instead of in France? And will he recognise, by failing to provide safe legal routes, the government forces people to use ever more dangerous alternatives and drives them into the arms of people smugglers, as at least 2 parliamentary committees have previously pointed out? And so, instead of bashing our brilliant human rights lawyers, will the government now put those safe routes in place, ensure a successor to the Dublin family unity rules, restart resettlement and commit to it for the long term, and reopen Dubs and other safe routes from Europe? Because that, Mr. Speaker, would be a response rooted in empathy and evidence.
Well, safe routes from Europe, I don't think are the answer to this problem, because by definition, people in Europe are already in a safe country, and transporting people from one safe country in Europe to the United Kingdom does nothing to add to their protection. There are, of course, routes for family reunion at the moment under Dublin and in the future under the United Kingdom's own immigration rules. And in relation to a safe legal route for people fleeing persecution, he himself has already referenced the resettlement programme, which between 2015 and the onset of coronavirus saw just a shade under 20,000 people being resettled directly from dangerous conflict zones, mainly in the vicinity of Syria. So those routes have existed for the last 5 years, yet I'm afraid, sad to say, illegal migration continued nonetheless.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. French authorities have a serious and significant role in preventing small boats crossing the Channel that put so many lives at risk. Does my honourable friend accept that the more that the French authority negate their responsibilities, the more lives are put at risk and the further encouragement is given to traffickers?
My honourable friend is correct, and I should pick up also on the point made a moment ago remotely. If we want to make sure lives are protected, the way to do that is to make sure no one attempts these crossings at all. And that means, as my honourable friend says, working with the French to stop these crossings taking place. That is the way to protect lives. That is the way to stop the ruthless criminal gangs exploiting migrants. And that is this government's objective.
Nadia Witt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report last year by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, of which the Home Secretary was a member at the time, said, in the absence of robust and accessible legal routes for seeking asylum in the UK, those with a claim are left with little choice but to make dangerous journeys by land and sea. How many more people, like Abdel Fattah Hamdallah, have to die before the Home Secretary creates those safe and legal routes?
Well, I've already pointed out that there are safe and legal routes into the United Kingdom. In addition to the vulnerable persons resettlement scheme that I've referenced already, that ran very, very successfully from 2015, there was also the vulnerable children's resettlement scheme, the Gateway scheme, and of course the Dub scheme, a commitment which we met in full. There are many people who claim asylum having arrived in this country on a visa as well. So the safe routes that she describes do exist already. But I would just emphasise once again, the people making these crossings on small boats are leaving a safe European country, France, having often travelled previously through countries like Germany and Italy, which are also safe countries with an asylum system. So if those people's principal concern is to secure protection from persecution, they have had ample opportunity to do so long before getting on one of these dangerous boats.
much, Mr. Speaker. Having had some responsibility in the past for the immigration system, I know how complex this particular subject is. So can I urge the Minister on two areas? One, to discourage those who are economic migrants. If we were to improve our asylum decision-making speed, that would discourage them. And secondly, use our development assistance, which the Shadow Home Secretary mentioned, to focus on the source countries to ensure that those people aren't leaving for economic reasons and have more reason to stay at home. And in that way, our 0.7% development assistance helps our national security as well.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, who, of course, has a long track record of distinguished service in this area. I completely agree with his point about overseas aid. This country is the only G7 country meeting the 0.7% of GNI commitment, and that is part of our efforts to help source countries economically develop. And as they do so, as my right honourable friend very clearly laid out, that will reduce the economic incentives to migrate.
Rosie Duffy.
Speaker, given the recent very violent assault on a young man who just landed on a Kent beach and the planned protests by far-right groups in Kent as reported in several broadsheet newspapers, what extra support is the Secretary of State offering police in Kent to ensure the safety of all those who seek asylum in our country? And will the Minister join me in telling those hate-driven violent groups that make their way to Kent to come back to where they come from?
Yes, I will join her in condemning wholeheartedly and unreservedly the groups she's describing who have targeted migrants in this way. There is no excuse at all, under any circumstances, for harassing people who have arrived. Whatever someone's views may be about the immigration system, there is no excuse, no justification. The police have our full support in dealing with anyone who perpetrates violent offences or indeed harassment offences of the kind she describes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree that the simplest and quickest way of ensuring the flow of illegal immigrants is stemmed would be to send them immediately back to France as soon as they reach our shores? And does he understand the anger and frustration felt by many people in Kent that the government is either unwilling or unable to take that action?
Well, I do understand and share the anger and frustration that my honourable friend, the member for Thanet South, describes. And I do agree that the best way to disincentivise or deter these dangerous and illegal crossings is returns when people arrive, because then the migrant wouldn't bother attempting the crossing in the first place. We are, as I said, in the process of progressing, getting on for 1,000 cases where the migrant has previously claimed asylum in a European country. We started that process in August, and in fact 26 people were returned on the 12th and the 26th of August. That is a small start, and we have a large number of further flights planned in the coming weeks and months to make sure those people who legally should be returned will be returned.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With reports that the UK Government is planning to reduce or scrap its overseas aid budget, will he confirm whether he is aware of the very clear link between migration patterns and efforts to provide international aid and development abroad? And does he agree that moves to cut back on this would only worsen the current situation?
Well, clearly improving conditions, economic conditions, in source countries is a vital part of tackling this problem upstream, as indeed is working with law enforcement agencies in those countries as well to disrupt the dangerous and ruthless criminals who operate in those areas. And I think work with the overseas aid budget is an important part of that, but so is trade. And as we negotiate trade agreements around the world, that will also help encourage economic development in some of the source countries. And as employment is created and prosperity generated, I hope that will also reduce the economic incentives for the kind of mass migration that we're currently seeing.
Tom Hunt.
I think the Labour Party can be more out of touch with the vast majority of people on this issue. And I must say I'm quite surprised you brought this forward. However, Labour Party strategy isn't a matter for me. One of the key drivers of illegal channel crossings is our easily exploited asylum system, and that once inside the system, illegal migrants know the chances they'll be able to stay for good are high. Will the Minister prioritise bringing legislation before this House which eliminates the vexatious aspects of our asylum system, like repeated asylum claims on different grounds, and consider the wiseness of using taxpayers' money to support those who have come over here illegally for illegal aid claims?
Well, I think, speaking frankly, my honourable friend is right in much of what he says. There are considerable issues with the way that our asylum and immigration system has been operating in this area, and I can confirm that there is considerable policy work underway to address areas where the UK's immigration and asylum system is being exploited and abused, and we are working on developing legislation to address these loopholes in exactly the way my honourable friend describes, because we will not tolerate our system being abused in any way.
Colin Lockhart.
Mr. Speaker, the UK has often been a safe haven for those fleeing their homeland for genuine reasons, be it for persecution or fleeing terror, and that should continue whilst recognising other countries can provide such protection. However, does the Minister believe that the Government has sufficient domestic tools and cooperation from the EU and others to manage illegal immigration into the common travel area and inward into the UK, whether that be through Northern Ireland or other ways?
Well, I think as we leave the transition period in a few months' time, we will want to continue cooperating with the European Union and indeed bilaterally with individual European countries, because the problem of mass migration is in many ways a shared problem. So that cooperation, I hope, will continue, and we're discussing that with the European Union, and we're discussing it bilaterally with France and Belgium and Germany and many other countries as well. So the sort of cooperation she's describing, I hope, will continue, but of course it takes two to tango. And I agree with her first point. We do have in this country a long and proud history of providing protection to those who are being genuinely persecuted, and of course that will continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for his robust response today, which I'm sure will provide some reassurance to the many people in Bishop Auckland who've contacted me about small boat crossings. Just last week, I understand that 23 migrants were due to be returned to Spain, but this was blocked by a string of legal cases. We need to remember that these are people who travelled to our country illegally, bypassing safe nations, including Spain and France. So does my honourable friend believe that the Home Office's efforts to facilitate legitimate and legal returns of illegal migrants are too often being frustrated by activist lawyers putting in last-minute challenges who are happy to see taxpayers' money wasted in such a manner?
Well, it is the case that the planned flight on the 27th of August to Spain was cancelled as a result of a large number of last-minute claims which were lodged when there was no time to properly consider those prior to the flight. I think it is likely that many of those were intentionally lodged at the last minute. But as those are being worked through, we will be organising subsequent flights so that people who can be lawfully returned to Spain, a safe country where these migrants had previously claimed asylum, can and should take place.
Mr. Speaker, I apologise in advance for stating the totally blindingly obvious, but I do so in the hope of assisting the Minister here. If we do not provide safe and legal routes for people who are fleeing war and persecution, then they will resort to unsafe and illegal routes. There is only one other country in Europe that does not allow unaccompanied refugee children to be reunited with their families and to sponsor that reunification. Why is that?
Well, I would repeat again that there are plenty of legal mechanisms by which people may claim asylum. I think about 40% of those people claiming asylum have entered the country in a lawful manner. And I will just draw attention once again to the resettlement scheme, which has seen almost 20,000 people get resettled here directly from conflict zones. Not people who are coming through France and Spain, who are in a safe country already, but people who were in or around places like Syria who were genuinely in danger. In relation to unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, given that last year we received over 3,500 UASCs, the highest number of any country in Europe, we need no lectures on that topic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my honourable friend confirm that his department is urging the French government to take more rapid and productive action to prevent boats leaving the French coast in the first place, and that he is looking at ways to return and economic migrants more rapidly, as well as processing those vexatious asylum claims in a more rapid manner?
Yes, well, I can confirm that we are doing all of those things. Work is underway as we speak to do more with our French colleagues. I've mentioned the Joint Intelligence Cell already, and we're doing work to strengthen the existing operational plans that we had, and the work on returns, both now under the Dublin framework and subsequent to the end of the transition period, is actively underway, because if we return people who make this unnecessary, dangerous and illegal journey, there will be no incentive, there will be no reason to attempt it in the future.
Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why we've seen a rise in the small boat crossings is because there's been a crackdown on border controls in terms of lorries, but also there's been a significant drop in freight traffic because of coronavirus. Doesn't this just show that the problem is not going to go away, despite the sort of military heroics that the government's trying to embark upon in the Channel? And we need to identify safe and legal routes, and particularly work in France with people that have got a proven connection to the UK, particularly refugee children, to try to deal with the problem before people set course to try to reach the UK by illegal means.
In relation to children, there are already, obviously, family reunification provisions in the Dublin regulations, and there are provisions for children to be reunified, particularly with their parents, under our own immigration rules that will come into force after we leave the transition period. But in terms of the sort of displacement between different methods of illegal entry, I mean, the Honourable Lady's analysis is, broadly speaking, correct. But just because it is difficult, or can be difficult, to stop illegal migration, that is not going to deter us from doing so. It is our duty as the United Kingdom's government to prevent illegal immigration and to choose, as a sovereign parliament and a sovereign nation, to decide who comes into the country and who doesn't. And we will never abandon our responsibility to properly police and protect our borders.
Go to Rushcliffe with Ruth Edwards. Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I congratulate my honourable friend and our law enforcement agencies on the recent arrests that have been made? And could he set out what further steps he's taking with counterparts overseas to smash the criminal networks who are exploiting migrants and risking their lives by organising these dangerous crossings?
I would like to add my tribute to the Honourable Member for Rushcliffe's tribute to our crime-fighting agencies, the police, the National Crime Agency and Immigration Enforcement, who are working day and night to break up these criminal gangs. I mentioned the raid, which I accompanied in July, which went to, I think, about 13 different addresses across mostly London, resulted in 11 arrests and the seizure of £150,000 in cash. There are multiple operations underway in the United Kingdom, but also working with law enforcement partners in other European countries and countries beyond Europe to break up these criminal gangs. It's not just in France, it goes way beyond France. They are dangerous, they are ruthless, they are exploiting vulnerable migrants, they're engaged in other associated criminality, and we will stop at nothing to get all of them rounded up, arrested and put out of business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been sad to watch a summer of the government chasing cheap newspaper headlines rather than getting a grip of this challenge, because growing global climate change will only make more challenging migration patterns for European countries. We need a cross-European solution. We've heard from the Minister for Immigration Compliance what his solution is, which is nothing to do with MiGov, stay in Italy, stay in Greece, stay in France, stay in Germany. That will not do. So I'd like to know, Mr. Speaker, from the Home Department and the Minister, what are they doing today to get to a mature, equitable and humane solution with our European partners?
Well, as I say, we have actually, as part of our European Union negotiations, made a detailed and comprehensive offer in relation to returns arrangements, readmission arrangements, and indeed UASC and family reunification. That offer was a detailed offer. It was we tabled a full legal text in both of those two areas, I think in May of last year, and that will provide the basis of the cooperation I think that he is describing. But if that agreement, for any reason, can't be reached, then obviously we will make our own unilateral arrangements, which are compassionate, humane and fair, but at the same time control our borders.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I wrote to the Home Secretary recently about the concerns raised by my constituents in Stoke-on-Trent Central, seeing repeated images on the media of these dangerous and illegal crossings. Our current asylum laws are bound by the EU's restrictive and rigid legislation. Will my honourable friend commit to reforming our laws around asylum, illegal migration and the associated criminality to stop these crossings completely once our transition period with the EU ends this year?
Well, I do share that objective, so does the Home Secretary, and so does the whole government. And where we need to legislate to tighten up the law in this area, to make these crossings impossible, we will not draw back or hesitate before taking those steps. We are determined to do whatever it takes to make sure our borders are properly policed, and if that requires legislation, then we will legislate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talked earlier with some pride, I think, about us taking the highest number of applications from unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, which I think is good. Now, overall, the UK takes 3 times fewer asylum applications than France, 3 times fewer than Spain, 4 times fewer than Germany. So if we were to reopen SATIRICAL properly, what level of asylum applications does he think would be a fair share for us to deal with?
Great question.
Well, look, I think when it comes to helping vulnerable people, it is far more effective to help people who are in dangerous locations rather than sort of shipping people from Spain to the United Kingdom, because countries like Spain are already safe countries. As I say, I think we do more than our fair share when it comes to protecting vulnerable people. I've already referenced the fact we are have the highest number of UASCs of any European country, and our resettlement programme, the 5 years from 2015 to 2020, took in more people directly from conflict zones than any other European country. So any suggestion that this country is not doing its fair share is completely wrong and completely misguided.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This issue just seems to be maundering on and on. We keep coming back to it again and again. And on June the 9th this year, I asked ministers about this issue. As my constituents in Clacton expect this matter to be dealt with, it's what they voted for. People's lives are at risk. Criminal gangs are getting rich, and it's got to stop. So what concrete progress has been made since I last asked this question? And I reiterate, we need to get the French Navy to step up to the plate and take those people off the boats in international waters. How are we going to ensure that this happens, and soon?
Well, since we last spoke, the French officers operating on or near French beaches have stopped hundreds of crossing attempts. They've stopped around about 3,000 crossing attempts so far this year. We've also established the Joint Intelligence Cell that I mentioned earlier, and intelligence passed from the National Crime Agency here in the UK to our French counterparts contributed to 84 crossing attempts being prevented this morning alone. So that is good progress. However, there is undoubtedly more that needs to be done, because these crossings are continuing at frankly unacceptable levels, and negotiations and discussions are continuing as we speak with our French colleagues to step up our efforts and activities even more.
Refugees experience situations like few of us could even imagine, yet in recent months, while sitting aboard overcrowded dinghies in the middle of the English Channel, they've been subjected to a voyeuristic media filming them like some sort of perverse sea safari, whilst also facing a UK government intent upon enforcing upon them its hostile environment. So can I ask the Minister, do either of these things give him any shame?
Well, I think the Honourable Member, frankly, has a cheek to talk about hostile environments in this context. We have one of the most accommodating asylum systems in Europe. When people arrive and claim asylum, they are accommodated, their council tax, their utility bills are paid for, they get an allowance to cover essentials and food. That is a far more accommodating approach than many other European countries. So to say that somehow they face a hostile reception, frankly, could not be further from the truth.
Let's head to Lincoln. We've got Carl McCartney. Carl McCartney.
Thank you, Speaker. Many of my constituents in Lincoln know that the majority of the illegal crossings are being facilitated by organised criminals who are exploiting vulnerable migrants and putting their lives at risk. And I've heard the answers my honourable friend has already given, but can he confirm that he and the Secretary of State are committed to cracking down on the criminals? And can he update us on the French levels of law enforcement in this regard? And how joined up are our Gallic friends in assisting the UK and our agencies under Home Office control in stopping this illegal practice from occurring and seemingly currently flourishing in the first place?
Well, there are dozens of investigations underway into these criminals who are facilitating illegal immigration. I've mentioned the 24 convictions and prison sentences given already this year in the UK, and there are a similar number, in fact I think a slightly greater number, that have occurred in France. We are now working ever more closely with our French colleagues and the various arms of the French government on this activity. We've got the Joint Intelligence Cell, there is the CCIC unit in Calais which coordinates activity between our two governments and our two sets of law enforcement agencies. I say an arrest was made as recently as this morning. The French are making arrests as well. Both governments share the objective that my honourable friend from Lincoln has described of putting these dangerous and ruthless criminal gangs out of business.
Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister keeps referring to applying for asylum in the first safe country as if it were a legal requirement. It is not. It is one of the criteria under Dublin. People have a right to apply in any country they choose, and family reunion is actually supposed to be taking precedence. So I would like him to correct that when he replies. And I would also like him to say if his government will focus more on the causes of migration, including the accelerating climate emergency, and including taking seriously a bill that I'll be tabling later today, the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, which is designed precisely to try to tackle some of these root causes of why so many people are taking to dangerous boats.
Well, and of course, we agree that dealing with issues in source countries, economic issues and others, is a vital part of fixing this problem. And migration trends across the world and into Europe, across the Mediterranean and the Aegean, have grown dramatically over the last few years. And the small boat crossings that we're seeing are a small part of that much bigger picture. In relation to climate change, I mean, this government's done a huge amount on climate change. We've virtually eliminated coal-fired power stations, one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, and CO2 emissions generally in this country have fallen dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years, as the Honourable Lady well knows.
We now come to Ben Bradley.
We owe it to my honourable friend the Minister and to the Home Secretary to be candid about the level of anger and frustration felt by many of my constituents in Mansfield and across the UK at stories we hear about illegal migrants arriving on our shores, being put up in hotels, having endless legal challenges funded at the expense of British taxpayers. He's right that we need to stop the boats from leaving France in the first place, stop this criminal activity and prevent people from putting their lives at risk in this way. But what can we do here at home to ensure that our domestic system for asylum and deportation is seen to be working for British taxpayers?
Well, the hotel situation that my honourable friend describes is really a very short-term temporary measure that was a response to the coronavirus epidemic. Certainly isn't intended to be permanent, and we're in the process of making arrangements to unwind it as quickly as we possibly can. In relation to the asylum system and the legal loopholes that exist, as I said, we are actively exploring legislative options to make sure our system is tightened up and can't be abused.
We now come to Liv Saville-Roberts.
His government is militarising a humanitarian crisis made worse by past military interventions in countries like Iraq, Afghanistan and Libya. The inconvenient truth, of course, is that Britain has long played the role of agitator, making worse global crises that destabilise regions and displace people. Wales is committed to becoming a nation of sanctuary. What will his department do to enable this, or is sanctuary not part of the government's vocabulary at present?
Well, in relation to the source countries, I mean, some of the largest source countries include Iran, Eritrea and Sudan, countries in which the United Kingdom has had no previous sort of military engagement. And in relation to the question about being a nation of sanctuary, I've already pointed out, last year we made 20,000 grants of asylum and other forms of protection. We've resettled just a shade under 20,000 people under the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, and many more under the Vulnerable Children's Resettlement Scheme, the Gateway Scheme, and indeed we've done the full number we committed to under the Dubs Amendment. That is very clear evidence, I would suggest, of this country's commitment to compassion and to giving refuge, but at the same time we will police our borders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd just like to start by paying tribute to our law enforcement and our Royal Navy, despite the comments opposite. It's approximately a 300-mile drive from Hayward in my constituency to Dover in the Honourable Lady's constituency. So when I say to the Minister that I've received a large number of communications on these crossings, I think he can accept the depth of feeling that comes from people not just in coastal areas but across the entire United Kingdom. So, in asking him to reiterate this government's commitment, can I ask him to make sure that no stone is unturned and no illegal crosser is unreturned?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Home Secretary and I and the government completely understand and fully accept the depth of anger that is felt right across the country at the crossings that are occurring illegally and dangerously and unnecessarily. And he can have my assurance that we will leave no stone unturned. We are trialling various methods that could be used on the sea to prevent these crossings, and we are actively exploring necessary legislative options. And as far as returns are concerned, we are working on a daily basis to return those who legally can be returned under the existing legal framework, and will be aiming to construct a replacement legal framework once we're outside of the transition period.
Very much. Mr. Speaker, the world is interconnected, and when we do not help fellow humans suffering from hunger or persecution or in war-ravaged nations, then they inevitably, in utter desperation, will risk life and limb and try to seek refuge elsewhere, including trying to cross the English Channel in small, unsafe boats. So does the Minister agree that it's a cruel irony that the Department for International Development, which works to eradicate poverty, is being abolished today as we debate the inevitable impact of so many people displaced by conflict or poverty or persecution?
Well, it strikes me as surprising that the Honourable Gentleman's analysis made no reference to the fact that we are the only G7 country contributing 0.7% of GNI in overseas aid. We were the second largest global donor of aid in the Syrian region, and so I think our contribution to that humanitarian effort is without question. Now, he talks about people fleeing war-ravaged countries, but the people getting on these small boats are not getting on the small boats and embarking from the shore of a war-ravaged or dangerous country. They're embarking from Calais. France is a safe and civilised country, so is Germany, Spain, Italy, and all of these other European countries. They're not fleeing war, they're crossing the Channel from France.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has repeatedly stressed that these people crossing the Channel illegally have already sought sanctuary in other countries in Europe. And yet they still come. The Minister has said that 1,000 people are being returned. But actually, what the House would like to know is what percentage of the people that have arrived on our shores illegally over the last year, say, have actually been expelled from the country, back to a country where they've already claimed asylum.
Well, in the last 18 months, about 185 people have been physically returned. There are a further, getting on for 1,000, whose cases we are currently progressing, where there is evidence of a previous asylum claim, and therefore, under the law, under the Dublin regulations, they are liable to be returned. And that work is continuing at pace. There are a number of flights that have been booked in the coming days and weeks to do exactly what my honourable friend is quite rightly calling for.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are still 6,000 children in makeshift camps in the EU. In the time it took for the Home Office to process the 480 spaces, only 480 spaces, it committed to under the DUBS scheme, hundreds of those young people have gone missing. In another life, they could be my children. With the DUBS scheme now formally closed, what steps is the Minister taking to protect vulnerable children, such as those in those camps, to seek refuge from war, torture and persecution?
Well, I've already pointed out to the House that last year we received 3,500 asylum applications from unaccompanied children, the highest number of any European country. That is our contribution to the European effort to look after children more than any other country. And I would call upon other European countries operating the camps she's describing to show the same compassion and attention that we do when we look after UASCs in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend rightly points out the issue that these crossings are facilitated by criminal gangs who, we should remember, care not a jot about those who are taking such treacherous journeys to our shores. But intelligence from the NCA and other partners suggests that these gangs aren't just facilitating people trafficking, they're linked to money laundering and wider OCG activity. So what assurances can the Minister give that actually we're looking at this issue in the round and applying all of our intelligence to try and stop these gangs and stop these crossings?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right in his analysis. And National Crime Agency officers are embedded in, with law enforcement units around Europe and beyond to track down these criminal gangs. It's not just an issue in the UK and in France. These criminal networks extend throughout Europe, through countries like Germany, Italy, Greece, often through Turkey, and thereafter into the Middle East. And the National Crime Agency and others are working tirelessly with other law enforcement agencies to crack down on these gangs in exactly the way he's describing.
We're going to get everybody in. We're going to have to speed up on length of questions and answers. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just last week, his department posted a video attacking so-called activist lawyers. Does understand Trumpian language like that and other comments in the Chamber today just risk stoking further divisions and tensions? So we'll apologise for demonising both asylum seekers and lawyers acting on their behalf for trying to undermine the rule of law and at least introduce safe passages to prove this isn't actually a dystopian government.
I've repeatedly outlined the safe passages or the safe routes that already exist, which many tens of thousands of people have availed themselves of. In relation to legal processes, that there are loopholes in our legal system at the moment, which are very frequently exploited, and this government is determined to close those loopholes.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 77% of the public, according to a poll, see illegal immigration as a serious problem. They know what the Minister knows too, that the system is being gamed. Asylum is a noble cause, giving safe haven to people in genuine need, something we should be proud of. But the system is broken and needs to be fixed. So, completely confident of the Home Secretary and his diligence, dedication and determination. When will we see a root and branch reform in the forward legislation?
Well, I share the right honourable gentleman's sentiments. He, of course, has a long record himself in the Home Office, and the work he is describing is underway as we speak.
Stephen Furry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm that the UK is not, in fact, being invaded? And would he recognise that the government's quasi-military response, rather than a humanitarian response, with terms such as the clandestine Channel Threat Commander, contributes to fueling tensions, the scapegoating of asylum seekers, and indeed racism?
There is nothing improper about seeking to police our country's borders, and this government will not apologise for doing so.
Elfie.
Mr. Speaker, Dover is the national centre for these small boats crossing routes. More than 5,000 illegal entrants this year, boats arriving day after day on the beaches in my constituency. Does the Minister agree with me that we can put an end to this small boats crossing route? And that has three parts. Stopping the boats before they leave the French shores, returning and turning around boats when they're English Channel and sending them back to France. And if people do break into Britain through these illegal routes, making sure that they are returned swiftly to France and other countries.
Well, the Honourable Member for Dover has been a tireless campaigner and advocate on this issue. I can testify to that as a Home Office Minister, and her analysis is essentially correct. The three strands of work that she just outlined are the three strands of work we are pursuing. Some of those will require some new techniques to be deployed on the water. We are trialling those at the moment. It may also require legislation, as the Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings mentioned a moment ago, and we are prepared to legislate.
Heading to Norwich with Clive Lewis. Clive Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The UK needs to do more, not less, to provide sanctuary for refugees, given the world's growing ecological and economic crises. Instead, what we have is this government dehumanising these people by presenting them as an illegal threat. This is a dangerous path, and one that goes completely against the ideals we should be aspiring to: empathy and humanity. Why can't the Minister and his government see this?
But where people have a genuine fear of persecution, where they are fleeing to our shores and need our protection, or where we encounter them directly in dangerous areas, we are of course prepared to offer protection, as we did via the resettlement scheme. But that in no way removes, dilutes or diminishes our obligation and our determination to protect our borders from illegal immigration. This Parliament and this country will decide who comes here, not ruthless people smugglers, and I call on the Honourable Member and indeed the Labour Party to assist us and work with us in protecting and defending our country's borders.
Anthony Higginbotham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. By the time people reach the English Channel, be they economic migrants that are using illegal routes or asylum seekers seeking safe haven, they have often passed through a number of safe countries. So could the Minister explain what steps the government is taking to make sure that those countries along the whole route are fulfilling their legal obligations?
Minister?
Well, the Honourable Member raises a very good and interesting point. I've already pointed out that the UK is scrupulous in discharging its obligations in international treaties to look after unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, but asylum seekers more generally. Not all countries in Europe are as diligent and as scrupulous as we are in discharging that duty. And I, again, take the opportunity to call on those countries to step up and do as much as we do to look after those vulnerable people who enter their country. And if they did that, that would again reduce the incentive for people to attempt these dangerous, illegal and unnecessary crossings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 9th of August, the Home Secretary announced that she had appointed a clandestine Channel Threat Commander. Can the Minister confirm precisely what powers the Commander has and how the elements of the role could not be addressed by the Border Force?
Well, former Royal Marine Dan O'Mahony was appointed, as she described. He has overall operational and policy responsibility for this particular rather unique problem which we face, very serious problem which we face, and because it is so multifaceted, it involves lots of different law enforcement agencies, not just Border Force, the National Crime Agency, Immigration Enforcement. It requires working with French authorities. It involves working with UK VI as well. We felt we needed a single person who was both empowered and accountable to seize control of the situation and get it fixed. And we think that Dan O'Mahony will do a fantastic job at this, will grip the situation and bring this problem under control.
Manchester.
Mr. Speaker, from my time on the Home Affairs Select Committee, I understand we had evidence of individuals coming in from into Serbia from Iran because there was a visa waiver. And from Iran, from Serbia, they go to France, and from France to the Channel, and from Channel to Kent, in my part of the country. I understand that loophole has now been closed. So how and through what countries are these illegal migrants getting into the EU and the Schengen? And I say to the Minister, my constituents in Kent on the front line urgently want the government to get this sorted swiftly.
Look, we hear that message loud and clear. We understand the anger at these illegal, dangerous and unnecessary crossings, and we will do whatever it takes to stop them, including working with the source countries and the upstream countries in the way the member for Gillingham has just described.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to understand the scale of this, am I right in saying that the number of asylum applications in the UK in the most recent year figures available was 35,566, and that the number of asylum applications for the most recent figures available in France was 114,500, and that for the same period in Germany the figure was 161,900?
And I believe the member's figures are correct.
We go to Blackpool with Scott Benton. Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Blackpool South are becoming increasingly frustrated at the completely unacceptable scenes on the South Coast. Whilst I do not doubt the determination of my honourable friend to tackle this problem, it appears that the government lack the legislative tools to take robust action that my constituents rightly demand. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the time has now come to fundamentally review our approach to illegal immigration and asylum so that we do not lose the public's trust on this vital issue?
Yes, I do agree with my honourable friend's sentiments. We understand and share the anger that his constituents feel, and he is a very effective advocate for them. We are doing work at the moment at pace to develop legislative options to achieve the outcome he desires, which is to properly control our borders.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike some of the ghastly rhetoric we've heard from some in the government benches, the Minister is well aware that refugee charities have asked the government to protect trafficked women detained in hotels in Glasgow, a call that's fallen on deaf ears, and the same campaigners are calling for this government to create safe, legal routes for asylum seekers, but instead we get a shameful response. Not doing enough to help refugees is inhumane and indefensible. So when will the Minister end, and the Department end, the dangerous rhetoric and the hostile environment and start treating refugees detained in hotels or in boats in the Channel with respect, dignity and compassion? Yeah.
No one is detained in a hotel. They're given free hotel accommodation, and in relation to modern slavery, the National Referral Mechanism provides extremely comprehensive protection to those people who've suffered from the appalling crime of modern slavery.
Jane Stevenson.
While the English Channel route remains viable, criminal gangs will continue to exploit vulnerable people and put lives at risk. My constituents want these gangs stopped. What further intelligence measures can we take with our French colleagues to trace perhaps the vessels that are being purchased by criminal gangs? These are large vessels, and surely more can be done to trace these things.
Work is underway in that area. The French authorities have clamped down a great deal on the sale of these vessels, so some of the more organised criminals now seek to procure them, not in France but in other countries elsewhere in Europe. But many of the migrants have now resorted to stealing boats and other vessels around northern France, and the French police are working hard to try and prevent that.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister's spoken much about compassion that this government is showing. But will he acknowledge that we all know the best way to prevent people from making desperate journeys, dangerous journeys, is to provide safe legal routes? And yet, in its negotiations with the EU, the government is seeking to end this country's mandatory obligation to reunite unaccompanied asylum-seeking children with their families. So could he use some of that compassion, perhaps, and persuade the government to change its negotiating position and allow those reunifications to continue?
It's not the government that requires persuading. We have tabled a detailed legal text providing for reunification, and we would like the European Union, the European Commission, to engage with it. So I think her good offices and her persuasive skills would be better applied to the European Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to the agencies involved in this, and in particular the recent intelligence sharing that led to the successful raids and stopping of these crossings at source? Can I ask the Minister to use the honourable member's expression about the blindingly obvious? People that get to the Channel and join small boats have clearly gone to safe countries that have working asylum systems. As we leave that transition period, can I implore, like honourable members on this side, that legislation is brought to this place to fix these legal gaps?
Well, I entirely agree with my honourable friend's sentiment, and I think that in the future he will not be disappointed by the legislative plans the government is currently formulating.
Navendu Mishra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps is the government taking to ensure that more accommodation settings for migrants are not targeted by far-right groups, as was the case in Coventry recently?
Well, I unreservedly condemn the incidents that he is describing, and the police have the Home Office's full support in protecting people from unacceptable abuse that he's been describing.
We're now heading to Damien Collins in Folkestone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But this problem has got worse throughout this year. And one of the consequences is that children in the asylum system are largely accommodated in Kent. The leader of the County Council said there were 589 in August, despite the fact that the safe number is considered to be 231 under the National Transfer Scheme. What can the Minister say about this situation? And will the government do more to make sure the children are accommodated safely in the asylum system away from Kent, not just principally in Kent, and make sure the County Council have the resources they need to care for the children that they are supporting at the moment?
Well, of course, we increased the funding that Kent and other authorities accommodating large numbers of UASCs receive. We increased that back in June. But I do recognise that Kent bears a disproportionately large share of UASCs. In fact, Croydon, my own local authority, does as well, because Luna House is in Croydon. I've been in regular contact with Roger Goff, the leader of Kent County Council. I pay tribute to him and his team for the work that they've done. We've been rapidly working with other local authorities around the country to transfer unaccompanied asylum-seeking children from Kent to other authorities. I'd like to thank those other authorities for the response they've so far demonstrated, and by doing that, I hope we're able to ease the pressure that Kent has been under, which I fully acknowledge, and we are working to reduce the pressure which the member for Folkestone has quite accurately described.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has just outlined some of the provisions to support children who are intercepted in these channel crossings. Does he feel that the local authorities right across this country actually have enough resources to support children who are intercepted?
Well, we recently increased the funding to support local authorities in relation to UASCs and indeed care leavers, so former UASCs who are now aged up to 25. That was increased by about £35 million per year just a few weeks ago. So yes, I do believe the financial support is adequate.
Henry. Speaker, it's clear these crossings are only made possible by criminals who thrive on exploiting vulnerable migrants and endangering their lives. Does my honourable friend agree that one of the safest ways to protect refugees is to crack down on this abhorrent trade and reform our asylum laws to ensure those most in need are protected?
Yes, I do. We do need to reform our laws to make sure we target our protection at those who are genuinely in need, and we need to show zero tolerance for the ruthless criminals who are preying on human misery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister join me in paying tribute to human rights and migration lawyers who do an absolutely essential job in upholding the rule of law and preventing the Home Office from breaking its international obligations under human rights and refugee conventions?
I don't believe the Home Office breaches its human rights obligations. We take them extremely seriously. We suffer from a large number of very late legal challenges, often repeated legal challenges brought sequentially on ever-shifting grounds, and we're working as hard as we possibly can to make sure that our laws are properly and fairly applied.
No question, Sally Ann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that our European friends and partners, not just the French, need to do more to help the UK prevent the crossings by focusing more resources and determination in cracking down on the organised criminal gangs across Europe who are exploiting individuals seeking a better life and forcing them onto boats to make perilous journey crossings across the Channel needlessly?
I completely agree. I think European governments have a moral obligation, as much as anything else, to join us in the work we're doing to put these dangerous and ruthless gangs out of business. They're taking the most vulnerable people, they're exploiting them, they're abusing them, they're taking money from them. It's completely unacceptable, and we're going to take the action on our side of the Channel we need to, and I hope other governments around Europe do exactly the same.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order!